So in this video, I'm going over Haddonfield Survivor Season 3. This is part of the series I'm doing where I'm doing a retrospective on all the Haddonfield Survivor seasons, except for the ones that are already filmed, because you can just watch them on the YouTube. But yeah, in this video, going over Season 3, all the different votes, all the people who were on it, cast, my rankings, just everything that happened. And yeah, this is the first true season of Haddonfield Survivor. Yes, there were Seasons 1 and 2, however, this is the season that took it to a whole new level. We had a much bigger cast. We had 20 people, which is really too big, honestly. I learned later that, it's better to have, 14 to 16. 20 takes so long. This season took, 8 hours, probably. But yeah, this is also a season that is commonly regarded as the best season. I mean, I had a lot of fun during this season. A lot of the tribals, while the gameplay is not necessarily super exciting, the tribals are really fun, the cast is really fun, there's some wild moments, and there's some good gameplay, so it's a lot of everything you could have asked for. I'm not exactly sure if I would say it's the best season at this point. I would have said that, a couple of years ago if you asked me, but, some of the later ones are pretty good too, but it's definitely up there. So as for the cast, we had mostly new players. I mean, with a 20-person cast, we were bound to have a lot of new players. But returning are the two winners, Declan and Evan. We also have Oshin and Jane back from Season 1, and Dan back from Seasons 1 and 2, and then Mackay and Ian, who were new last season. But yeah, overwhelmingly new cast. From left to right, top to bottom, we have Ben, Caleb, Chris, Harry, Ian, Jackson, Mary, Max, Riley, Sam, Ted, Teo, and Vinny. And yeah, pretty big improvement on the last season. And we got a lot of different people. There's a lot of overlap, obviously. There's a lot of tennis people. Still a lot of my friends. But, overall, there's a lot of random people. People who only know one or two people. And I think that's what makes Haddonfield Survivor better. But yeah, this slide shows the pregame relationships, sort of. I mean, it's kind of a mess. But top, middle part, we have, my friends, kind of, with, Jackson, Vinny, Dan, and, Declan and Ted. On the right, we have the tennis older people. We have Teo, Sam, and Riley, who are associated with Ted and Ben. And then over on the left, we have, the Mackay group and all the people who are loosely affiliated with him. But yeah, there's kind of a lot of little connections, a lot of people across the board, and it was kind of unclear how this was going to go. Before we get into the first round of the game and the tribes and stuff, we had a twist at the beginning of the season. Now, with there being 20 people, I was a little worried that this was going to take forever, which it does. It takes 8 hours, as I said. So I added this twist in at the beginning where when everyone got there, I had planted 19 spoons at the one camp, told them all to go run and get one, and whoever didn't get one was just instantly eliminated just like that, which is a really cruel twist, and I sort of regret doing it because it kind of robs us of getting to see one person play the game. But it happened, obviously, and we have to talk about it. Here are the results. So Ted got first, and getting first in this challenge meant that you got to skip the first round, obviously, because there would be an odd number, so someone was going to skip the first round, which is something that I just generally like doing and happens on a lot of seasons. Ted also got a clue to a special third idol that no one else knew about, so that's also something. Now, Dan, Caleb, and Riley were last, the last three. Dan found it, and then it was a pretty long time before Caleb found his, but it was a pretty triumphant moment of him running back. And yeah, we lose Riley before he even got to play the game. Kind of surprising considering he's one of the more athletic people in this cast. And it was pretty upsetting also because Riley was one of the people who actually knew Survivor and wanted to play, and he never gets to come back after this, even though I invited him back a couple of the seasons after this, but sadly it never worked out. He never got to play. Really not a lot to say about him, but unfortunately he was out before he even got to start. So now we can get into the actual first round of the game. Here are the tribes, and the tribes were decided randomly this season. I made that decision because I didn't like the idea of, me choosing the tribes and then people being on a bad tribe, getting voted out, and being able to blame me. So even though random tribes can result in like strong versus weak groupings, I just thought it was more fair. So we did it randomly, and these are the tribes. On the red tribe, we have Mackay, Ian, Harry, Chris, Jane, Teo, Caleb, Jackson, and Ben. On blue, we have Vinny, Dan, Evan, Declan, Sam, O'Sheen, Mary, Ian, and Max. And obviously Ted is skipping the first round. He will just take the spot of whoever gets voted out first. So he'll join the blue tribe because, as you can see, the red tribe won immunity. The immunity challenge was a relay race, which was how most of the seasons back then began. Not really much to note from this one, but yeah, red tribe won, blue tribe would go to tribal, whoever got voted out would be replaced by Ted. So let's get into that first tribal. As far as I'm aware, there wasn't any like official alliances, at least at this point on this tribe, but it did kind of seem like that like middle group consisting of like Max, Ian, O'Sheen, Mary, kind of Declan, kind of Sam, sort of had an agreement. I mean, Max and Ian definitely had something. Max and Mary definitely had something. Evan, O'Sheen, Mary were kind of a group. And then obviously Declan is with O'Sheen. And I think Sam at this point was kind of positioned as like the figurehead of this group. I mean, he presented himself as like the leader of this tribe, even though in actuality he didn't really have that much power over the vote. But this alliance structure kind of left Vinny and Dan on the outside. I mean, Dan wasn't trying at all, as normal. And Vinny was only trying to do his one strategy. And because he was targeting someone in the alliance, the unofficial alliance, he became ostracized. And it's really stupid because, I mean, this tribe has a lot of people that are like in my friend group. I mean, you got Declan, Vinny, Dan, kind of Ian, kind of Sam, even kind of Max and Evan. Like, there's no reason why Vinny or Dan should be getting voted out here. They just weren't playing very well. However, it was a good move for people like Max or Mary, even Ian maybe, as it definitely does not benefit them to have both Vinny, Dan, and Ted all on their tribe. And I think at least Max was probably aware of that. So we get to the results of the vote, and most people end up voting for Vinny. There was a big effort for that. We see Sam and Ian vote for Dan, which I'm pretty sure was a split vote plan in case somehow Vinny had found the idol, which of course he didn't. Vinny ends up voting for Mary, obviously. Do we see Dan vote for Vinny? Dan has no idea what's going on, and I think he thought that Vinny wasn't getting voted out for some reason, because he was completely out of the loop. So he votes for Vinny as a joke, and then Vinny actually gets voted out, and they have an argument, which is kind of funny. But yeah, we lose Vinny here, and Vinny plays pretty bad. He's given a pretty okay tribe draw, but he just completely squanders that opportunity. I mean, his plan to target people who are bad at the challenges is just like not a good idea, because you really should just be targeting people who are not like gonna be with you. Yes, the challenges matter to a certain extent. However, if that's your only determiner on who you're voting for, like, you're going to be a liability to other people. And I mean, the fact that people like Declan and Dan didn't even vote to keep him, like, it just shows that he was just not cut out for this game strategically or socially. So, not a huge loss, but I mean, Vinny was kind of funny to watch in this season. I mean, when a player is so actively bad, it's like kind of funny to a certain extent. So then we get into round 2 of the game. Now, obviously Ted joins the blue tribe. He has the idol probably at this point, I'm pretty sure. The, like, special third idol. I believe that at this point, the other 2 idols, like the regular tribe idols, were probably not found yet, but I'm not exactly sure when they were found, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Anyway, the challenge this round was a crazy one, which we've never done again because it's a little violent. But we did a tug of war challenge where there was a bike tire, and one person from each tribe had to run out and get it, bring it back to their starting line while trying to prevent the other person from doing that. And we only did a couple rounds of this. We had I believe O'Sheen versus Teo. I don't exactly remember the matchups. Maybe it was O'Sheen versus Chris. I know Declan competed also. I think Ted too. Don't exactly remember, but the red team ends up winning again. This tribal isn't actually that interesting, but there are a couple things going on. So the main, core group, I won't say alliance because I know it wasn't really an official alliance. I mean, they have Dan to vote out, so that's really easy. But some other things start happening. I mean, well, we can just get into the votes right now. So Dan ends up voting for Ted. Everyone else votes for Dan. O'Sheen votes for Ian, and it's a little unclear at this point. I'm pretty sure O'Sheen actually was targeting Ian. However, there's also a chance that he just did that as a split vote thing in case Dan had some idol. I'm not really entirely sure. Because of the fact that O'Sheen wasn't exactly super into the game this season, I would lean towards the fact that this wasn't a plan and he just wanted to vote for Ian. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, it's pretty clear that like Ted integrated pretty well. I mean, he has Declan, he had a good alliance with Ian and Sam, probably Max. But yeah, Dan was pretty clearly going to be booted here, and again, just like the first two seasons, he wasn't that good. This is now the third season in a row where he was booted really early, didn't try very hard, was kind of just there memeing, and yeah, there's not much to say about Dan. Let's move on. Going into the third round of the game, we get the trivia challenge for this season, which I don't exactly remember the format. The format for the trivia challenge changes a little bit every year, but regardless, the blue team actually ends up winning this challenge. They were a pretty good mental comp team, but of course, sadly for them, there's only one mental comp usually. Regardless, we get to actually see the red team go to tribal, and the red team dynamics are actually kind of interesting. I mean, we see a much more solid core alliance form, mostly due to Mackay. He has Chris, he has Caleb on either side of him. They pull in Teo and Ben, who are both on the tennis team, and Teo and Chris also form a sort of duo. They're looked at as a pair for a lot of the games, so yeah, the five of them are the core alliance. I'm pretty sure it was an actual alliance, like they solidified something, but don't quote me on that, I'm not exactly sure. Beyond this, we had Jane, who has a good relationship with Caleb and Mackay, and she forms a pretty good relationship with Chris and Teo. They want to keep her safe. Ian and Harry aren't really seen as threats. They don't really have strong relationships with anyone else, but they're kind of on the periphery. I think they're with each other, sort of. So then the major outlier on this tribe is Jackson, who doesn't really get put on a tribe with anyone he knows. I mean, he vaguely knows Harry, but that's like about it. Almost all of his friends are put on the other tribe, which is really bad for him on multiple levels. I mean, obviously he doesn't have anyone to work with, but also someone like Mackay and Ben, they realize that, I mean, Jackson's friends are all in the other tribe, so if he gets to be reunited with them, he's going to join them. So obviously he becomes the clear target here. The Mackay Alliance, which, I mean, they didn't have a name, so I'm just going to call them the Mackay Alliance. They're smart enough to realize they need to split the votes just in case, so they do end up putting, and let's just go to the votes now. Teo and Jane do end up voting for Harry, while the other four members of the core alliance vote for Jackson. Harry also votes for Jackson. Ben's name had also been floated around by people who weren't in the alliance, so Ian and Jackson end up voting for Ben. And the alliance was right for splitting the votes because Jackson does have a hidden immunity idol. He found it, I don't know when, but kind of early probably. However, for some reason we see Jackson not play the hidden immunity idol. Now, he probably was completely unaware of the dynamics on this tribe. He heard Ben's name from someone, and he probably thought that was the actual plan. But it was pretty overwhelmingly not the plan, and he gets voted out 5-2-2. And let's talk about Jackson. And before I do, I have to mention the anecdote of Jackson, Vinny, and Dan got up really early. They were on a trip. In order for them to make it to Haddonfield Survivor on time, they had to get up at like 5 a.m. and drive like a couple hours. So then when they arrive and they get voted out first, second, and third, it's pretty funny, honestly. But yeah, let's talk about Jackson, who, I mean, he gets a really bad draw, to be fair. Like, he's definitely much less at fault for his boot than Dan and Vinny, definitely. But honestly, in the grand scheme of Survivor, he's honestly one of the more unlucky players for that. Yes, I totally will fault him because he found the idol and didn't play it on himself, despite almost everyone being against him. That I will definitely fault against him. However, just being in that bad situation in the first place, there wasn't a whole lot he could do. I mean, you would have had to be a truly elite player to get out of that situation, and clearly he's not. But overall, mostly just an unlucky game, so yeah. This also starts a trend for this specific season where the idols on this season just get played horribly wrong. Almost no one knows what to do with the idols on this season, which is pretty funny, honestly, at some points. We'll get to it. The next round of the game had alligator wrestling, obviously one of the classic challenges of early Survivor. And what do you know, the red tribe goes back to winning, with it being a physical challenge. So this round should have been a fun tribal. I mean, the blue tribe has run out of easy targets with Dan and Vinny being gone. And, O'Sheen is targeting Ian still at this point. So there should be a war brewing, but it kind of goes out in a whimper, and this ends up being one of the more underwhelming tribals. Yes, O'Sheen wants to vote for Ian, so him and Declan are going to vote for Ian, but Ian has some pretty solid allies behind him. I mean, Sam, pretty solid. He has a really good relationship with Max, so, with them not having any other options, they're going to vote for O'Sheen. It does seem like people like Ted, Mary, and Evan are a little more unsure on what to do this round, but it becomes pretty clear because O'Sheen really wasn't in it this season. He was a little preoccupied with outside of the game circumstances, so it was kind of clear that he wasn't going to be a reliable long-term ally, so that's probably why Evan and Mary were so okay with letting him go. And Ted just went along with what Max and Ian did for most of the game anyway, so that's not too surprising either. I also should note that Evan and Mary jointly found the Blue Tribe idol this round-ish. I don't exactly know when it happened, but some point around this time they found the Blue Tribe idol. But yeah, we lose O'Sheen this round, 6-2 vote. Not really that interesting. He doesn't really try to stay that hard. He was kind of underwhelming on this season. He wasn't in a bad position on the tribe, but he just wasn't in it. And his blatant targeting of Ian was really not a good strategy. But again, I don't really think he was thinking that strategically on this season anyway. But definitely a pretty underwhelming return for someone who was so good on his first season. But we'll see a lot more of O'Sheen throughout Haddonfield Survivor, so that's good at least. The next round of the game had a pretty fun challenge, the Stacking People Challenge, which never comes back, but was really fun, honestly. Probably should bring that back, but, probably no more Haddonfield Survivor, so maybe I'll suggest it to Aiden. Anyway, this challenge basically was like you were timed, and you had to have the least amount of people touching the ground at the end of the timer. So, you had to climb on top of each other or pile on top. The Blue Tribe had a really creative strategy, which I won't describe. It was a little weird. Thought of by Sam. But yeah, they end up winning, and we get to see the Red Tribe back at Tribal. And this Tribal's not too interesting. The Core 5 Alliance plus Jane, who's an add-on of Teo and Chris, are pretty clearly going to vote out either Harry or Ian. The question is which one. And coming into the season, I thought Mackay would have a better relationship with Ian based on them being in an alliance in the previous season. However, it's pretty clear that at least Ben and Caleb want to keep Harry, and some of them don't trust Ian. Maybe they also saw Harry as less of a threat. I'm not exactly sure. I don't really know why they would, considering Ted was on the other tribe, so clearly Harry has some connections. But regardless, the 5 Alliance chooses to vote out Ian. I don't know if Harry and Jane knew about this plan. They do end up voting with Ian for Caleb. Again, I don't know why they voted for Caleb either, but it's unclear whether or not Jane and Harry were voting with Ian just to, stay loyal to him, or if they actually were legitimately left out of the plans. But we can talk about Ian, who gets his second chance this turn, and he actually gets to play, which is good, but he doesn't do much. I do think he was relatively screwed over. This tribe's not super good for him, and he was just left out of the majority alliance. It's as simple as that. He could have gotten dragged further had they won this challenge. I do think he would have probably been dragged to the end. He wasn't really a threat, but not a super good game, obviously. But mostly just a passive one. And, I mean, he doesn't do anything particularly wrong. But, yeah, that's Ian's game on Season 3. We can move on to the tribe swap, which occurred in the next round. So going into the tribe swap, the original teams were actually tied in numbers, which is kind of surprising considering the blue team lost a lot of challenges, but that's just how it worked out with Ted joining them. And when I announced this tribe swap, there was actually a lot of anxiety about which tribe they were going to draw, because it was pretty clear that these two tribes were going to kind of stay loyal to each other. I mean, Makai's alliance was really solid, with him, Chris, Teo, Caleb, and Ben, at least, potentially with Harry and Jane. And then the blue tribe was pretty centralized, with Max, Ted, Ian, Declan, Sam, Mary, them all being like pretty locked in with each other. So we saw a lot of panicked faces before this tribe swap, as people did not want to be put on the tribe with majority people from the other tribe. But yeah, here are the swap tribes. The red tribe ends up keeping 4 of the original core 5 with Chris, Teo, Ben, and Caleb. They get joined by Sam, Mary, and Evan, who were not too happy about this draw. But they do have the idol from the blue tribe, so that's important to note. Most of the blue alliance stays intact, with Declan, Max, Ted, and Ian obviously staying together. And they get joined by Jane, Harry, and Mackay. And Jane and Harry, obviously not too big of threats. Obviously Harry's with Ted also. And the two of them are on the bottom of the red tribe. But this is a really unfortunate swap for Mackay. I mean, he's swapped with 2 people from his original tribe that were not in his alliance. His entire alliance is on the other tribe. And then pretty much the 4 core members of the other tribe's main alliance are on this tribe. And they see him as the leader of the other tribe. So with him not having any sort of protection at all, he's just like asking to be voted out right here. He's completely screwed if they don't win out. And his tribe does win the first challenge, and that challenge was that running up the net challenge, where I did like 1v1s with that net on the one playground. I did it in Season 6, I think, also. But yeah, instead we get to see the red tribe go to Tribal Council, which would have probably been mildly interesting. I mean, obviously we were split 4-3, but there were some question marks about Caleb, because potentially he could have flipped. I mean, he said in the future after this that there really wasn't a chance of him flipping here. And going into Tribal, it was kind of surprising to me how solid he seemed with the red tribe. But outside of that, there wasn't that much intrigue. I mean, that group of 4 was going to stick together. They were probably going to vote for Mary here. However, they don't get the chance because Sam basically decides to fall on the sword here and say that he wants to get voted out to protect them. He also just had to leave, so that was probably why. So the Tribal ends up being really boring. I mean, everyone votes for Sam. Sam votes for Teo. Sam goes home. And I actually liked Sam on this season. I mean, the end of his journey was really underwhelming. I mean, we never got to see truly his game play out, with him sort of having to leave at the end. But his original pre-swap tribe, I mean, he's in the Majority Alliance at the very least. He's sort of the figurehead for the Majority Alliance, leads them in the challenges, has some allies, and then he has some alliances on the other tribe, obviously with Teo, and probably through that he would have Ben maybe. But he could have made a run on this season, probably would have gotten like mid-merge if he didn't quit here. I don't think he would have been voted out on this tribe had he decided to not quit. But alas, that is the timeline we got, and he's here in 14th place. We now head into round 7, and this is where it all goes downhill for a certain player. Obviously, we know who that player is. The challenge for this round ends up being the running up the wall challenge. We saw this challenge in at least Season 1. It might have been in Season 2. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, this one is a little unsafe, and with this big of a cast, a lot more people doing it, they kind of stacked a bunch of people, because, you know, the goal of the challenge is to touch, like, the highest part of the wall. But yeah, a little bit unsafe. The red tribe ends up winning, and yeah, as I said, this tribal's a little sad. Not too much happens, though, honestly, so we can just run through it. So going into it, as I've said, the original Blue Tribe alliance of Max, Ian, Ted, and Declan, which wasn't really a solid alliance, but they were all together, and they knew it. That group very clearly was targeting Mackay. I mean, they saw him as the leader of the other tribe, which, I mean, he was, so it's a fair assumption. Both Harry and Jane are also new to this tribe, but, like, they weren't really seen as threats, and obviously Ted had Harry. Like, they weren't going to vote out Harry because he was an add-on for Ted, and then Jane was obviously good with, like, Max immediately, and she was already good with Declan, she was sort of good with Harry, so they weren't going to vote out Jane either. It was really clear they were all going to vote out Mackay. However, despite how clear it might seem from the offset, and how clear it was going to be to most of the people in this tribe, Mackay does actually manage to make a somewhat decent play here. I mean, he was never going to survive this travel, but he does manage to get Ted to flush his idol as he starts to target Harry, as he feels like that's the only person that possibly he could get them to vote for. I mean, the 4 core members, they're not going to vote for each other, and they're not going to vote for Jane either. So I think his strategy here was to try to get Max and Ian to vote out Harry, like, to take a number away from Ted, which I do think is the best possible route here, even if it was still not going to work. But anyway, he talks to them a lot about it, and he successfully manages to fluster Ted, and even though no one flips on Ted, he still freaks out and plays the idol on Harry, thinking Harry's going to go on home. But yeah, we get to the votes, and everyone votes for Mackay. They don't even try to split the votes. I guess they knew that Mackay didn't have the idol, which is kind of a little bit of a weird thing. They should have put 1 vote on Harry. But I guess they were trying to stay unified, so I kind of get it. So the vote ends up being 6-1, with the 1 vote being negated, and Mackay goes home, unsurprisingly. And yeah, this is where Mackay gets pretty swap screwed, and this becomes a trend for Mackay. It happens in a couple seasons. And yeah, Mackay was playing pretty well before this. The way he set up the original Red Tribe was pretty impressive. I mean, yes, he knew a lot of them. He had Caleb, he had Chris, sort of the tennis people in Teo and Ben, but he still was able to solidify their loyalty to the point where, like, none of them were willing to betray that alliance even after the swap. It's just really unfortunate that he got swapped away from all of them, and I think he made it a little bit too clear that he was the leader of that group. However, I mean, people were going to see him as a threat anyway, right? So he didn't really have a chance anyway, unless he came into the merge with his numbers, and he just got a really unfortunate swap that prevented him from getting there. I mean, overall, a good game, I would say. Just an unfortunate ending for a good player. We now get into the 8th round of the game, which is the final round before the merge, and this round is kind of a shit show. So the challenge was supposed to be a capture the flag type game, but the rules were kind of poorly thought out, and it ends up being executed pretty terribly. I don't exactly remember what happened, but I remember everyone was mad about how it happened. But the Blue Tribe does win, and of course the Red Tribe members are mad at me. But they have to go to Tribal Council anyway, so, I mean, this Tribal Council's not too interesting. I keep saying that. It makes it seem like the season's bad. The season is actually pretty good. It's just the minutia in each of these votes is sometimes not super interesting strategically wise, but, like, the actual tribals were pretty fun to be at. So the 4-person alliance from the original Red Tribe, now without Mackay, their figurehead, they do choose to stay together still. Chris, Teo, Caleb, and Ben are all locked in with each other. And they're planning on targeting Mary because, you know, Evan's not really that big of a threat. I know he won the last season, and they knew that too, but Evan's just not a very threatening presence. And he also had a good relationship with Ben, so I think Ben was unwilling to get rid of him. However, the wrench in the plan here is that Evan and Mary have the hidden immunity idol from the original Blue Tribe, and they just have to figure out who the other group is voting for and play the idol correctly. Now, they should have been screwed here because the Red Tribe Alliance should have split the votes, but they don't do that. Not only do they don't do that, but Mary asks Chris who they're voting for, and he says her, so that should have been the end of it. They should have been able to successfully idol out someone from the game. But of course, she thinks that Chris is lying, plays the idol on Evan, even though Chris wasn't lying, and he actually legitimately, like, caved in here. Plays the idol on Evan, and she gets voted out. For some reason, they also vote for Caleb here, which doesn't make any sense, because if they had idled out Caleb, the one person they, possibly could have pulled over onto their side, that would have been just so dumb. Especially because Chris and Teo are way bigger threats, so really didn't make any sense to me. Pretty terrible gameplay. We also see the trend of the idols being played disastrously on this season continue, with all 3 of the pre-merge idols being played pretty poorly. But yeah, we're just gonna move right into the merge now. So yeah, going into the merge, we had a pretty interesting dynamic. Not any group outright having the numbers. We do have the original Red Tribe, which is planning on sticking together, but they only consist of 4 people out of 11, which is very clearly not a majority. Then we got Max's group, which is the original Blue Tribe group, which is him and Ian, also Ted, also Declan. So that's 4-ish, but they've also pretty much picked up Jane and Harry. I mean, Harry's an add-on for Ted. And Evan was kind of with the original Blue Tribe, sort of, and so was Jane after the swap. So the 2 of them have a good relationship with Max, at least. So there's sort of more on that side, even though Evan kind of has a relationship with Ben. The dynamics are a little complicated. You got a lot of cross-contamination here with, Ian being with Caleb, Ben being with Evan, but generally there's the 2 original sides. But yeah, first things first, we had another dumb twist. I was afraid this would take too long, and I mean, the season did take too long, so I was rightfully afraid. We ended up having, in the first immunity challenge after the merge, the first person dropped from the planking challenge was instantly eliminated from the game, which is extremely cruel. And luckily, it didn't affect anyone who cared. Everyone who cared got to stay. And instead, Declan, who knew that other people wanted him more, he had already won, he maybe potentially had to leave in an hour or 2, he just decided to bow out and let everyone else continue, which makes sense. So we lose Declan here, and I always forget that Declan was on this season. He doesn't do a whole lot. He is pretty well positioned on the original Blue Tribe, but again, not super active, and he's with Oshin, who does a bunch of stupid stuff, and he lets Vinny and Dan go. He just plays really passively despite being good with most people, so not really much to talk about here with Declan, so we can just move into the rest of the merge round. So the dynamics at this point, we see Max really solidify his spot as being in control of the game at this point. So he sort of has all the numbers with him, but they're not really unified in any way. So what he does is he paints the original Red Tribe as the enemy in order to actually collectively get everyone together. And what I mean by that is the group of Chris and Teo and Ben and Caleb were seen as very solid, so by pointing that out to everyone, it sort of united them behind him and against them. This was also pretty easy to do because Teo and Chris were very separate from other people, not having too many relationships, especially with Mackay gone. And they were also both big guys who were scary in the challenges, so that made it easy to suggest targeting them. And yeah, in the planking challenge, Chris almost wins and then drops the last second, losing to Ian, which Chris was very upset about. And he will get redemption later, spoiler alert, but this is sort of a bad moment for him. So going into the pre-tribal dynamics, it's pretty clear that Max has garnered Ian, Ted, Evan and Jane, and also Harry on his side, which is a majority. And I'm pretty sure that was clear to the Red Tribe members too. So you start seeing Ian doing his work to pull Caleb also, and Max and Evan are pulling Ben, so they're further sinking the Red Tribe's ship. And even though Ben and Caleb are probably trying to stay loyal, Chris and Teo's ship is just completely sunk at this point. And it's also pretty clear that Chris, as the person with the least connections, is just pretty screwed here. Going into the vote, we see it being a 6-2 to 1-1 vote, with most of the Blue Tribe Alliance putting their votes on Chris. They also put 2 votes on Teo, with those votes being Caleb and Ben. I don't know exactly what happened there. It kind of seems like a split vote and them not fully trusting the 2 of them, which makes a lot of sense. And if that's what it is, then pretty good move from the Blue Tribe members. Chris and Teo obviously don't know what's going on. One of them votes for Ted, one votes for Harry. But yeah, Chris goes home, and Chris plays decently. I mean, considering he didn't know anyone except for Mackay, he plays pretty well. He's in a solid majority alliance, makes good relationships with Ben and Teo and Jane. It's just he's a really big threat, and Max just had such a stranglehold in the game. And honestly, if he was playing against worse players, like, it's kind of unfortunate he had to play against, like, Max and even, like, Ian, because he might have been able to get past this round, but alas, he was outplayed by Max. So what are you going to do? Moving on. Alright, going into the final 9 round, as you can see, the jury is forming. Mary, Declan, and Chris are all the first 3 members of the jury of 9 this season, which is kind of an oversight because 9 jury members with a final 3 could result in a tie, but that doesn't happen. So, but still, it's kind of stupid, but whatever. Anyway, this round isn't super interesting in itself, but it does have a lot of setup for later, as we see the brilliantly executed strategy from Max in this round come more fully into effect. The challenge this round is just like finding an object that I hid. Don't really remember it. But Ben wins immunity, and it was pretty clear at this point that Teo was going home. There wasn't really any other major options, and it just made a lot of sense at this point. But we also see Evan find the merged tribe idol at this point, which doesn't have any effect on this round, but I should just note it because it happened here. So it's at this point that we really see Max's strategy shine, because whether it was super intentional or not, he sort of creates this, like, duos strategy. I mean, he's got Ted and Harry on one side. They're more loyal to Max than they are to anyone else, as far as I know. I mean, they're sort of loyal to Ian, but mostly Max. He's also got Ian, who's been his closest ally since the beginning, and Ian's starting to pick up Caleb, even though Caleb's not with the rest of the Blue Tribe people. He's got Evan and Jane, who are obviously together, and Evan has this growing relationship with Ben, and Ben is really the biggest oversight in Max's game, because Max has a good relationship with Ben, but Ben is the most wary of Max, so he really should have been more scared of him. But anyway, he sort of lumps Ben into that Evan and Jane group that's his third side alliance. So with him being the core of these 3 side alliances, it's just masterclass strategy. Like, the fact that also they weren't catching him doing this, like, I mean, Ben is sort of catching on to it, but the fact that he's able to maintain this structure, it's just so good. I know I'm sort of hyping Max up a lot, but it's just a really good strategy. Not to say that Max's game is flawless, and not to say that the other players here also don't have their own merits, but it's just really impressive. I had to point it out. I mean, the other players are playing pretty good too. I mean, Ian has Ted and Harry, I guess, and him picking up Caleb is good. And then Ben adding himself to the Evan and Jane group is also good. So, I mean, there's some good gameplay from other people too, but it's just Max is crazy leagues above everyone else. So that whole group decides to split the votes this round, where some of them are voting for Caleb just as a backup, just in case Teo is the idol, because they don't know where the merge idol is. And it seems like they plan on doing a 5-3 split with Max, Ben, and Ted voting for Caleb, as we can see here. But Caleb ends up voting for himself, which I don't really understand, especially because he definitely didn't want to quit, because he keeps trying after this, so it just doesn't really make sense. Caleb's a weird player. But yeah, on the revote, Teo gets voted out. Only Jane votes to save him, which is a sympathy vote. But yeah, let's talk about Teo, who technically could have saved himself this round because he votes for Ted, but if he had voted for Caleb, Caleb would have gone home, which is kind of stupid, but whatever. Anyway, Teo, sort of similar to Chris. He was a little less active than Chris, but slightly better positioned just because he was less of a physical threat and also already knew more people than Chris, but pretty underwhelming game. I think he's just naturally decent at Survivor, though, and that's why he gets all the way to 9th place. But overall, not too crazy game, but this is the last time we see Teo, so that's that for him. Let's move on to the final 8. So the final 8 round is actually kind of interesting because this is the point where Max has to start targeting someone within his big onion structure. So, I mean, the easy choice is Caleb because he's an add-on. They already voted for him last round. A lot of these people don't really care about him other than Ian. However, he should really be targeting Ben because Ben's the most suspicious of him. And also, the Evan, Jane, Ben group is the biggest subgroup, so he should be cutting that one down. But anyway, even if he wanted to do that, Ben wins immunity this round also. He wins the soccer goals competition, so that's off the table anyway. And he actually does sort of seem to go along the lines of targeting the Ben group because his target then becomes Evan. Now, he doesn't know that Evan has the idol, or at least as far as I know, he didn't know that. But he does start to pick up on the fact that Ben and Evan are the most suspicious players of him. I mean, Evan kind of makes it a little too known that he thinks Max is playing really well, and that just makes him a big target. So Max goes to his other 2 duos and tries to get them to target Evan, and it's pretty easy to do that considering they all wanted to target Ben anyway, and Evan was close to Ben, and he also has the argument of them being a trio. So yeah, we get into the vote, and Max gets the 2 duos to vote for Evan. He votes for Evan. The other 3 don't know that's going to happen, and Evan and Ben were even distracted. They were being way too cocky. Evan doesn't even play his idol. They vote for Caleb, thinking that that's the plan, because he's the other member of the original Red Tribe. They were pretty clueless this round. So we lose Evan here. Evan actually had some good reads and good relationships, honestly. His relationship with Ben was good, with Max was good early on. He was well integrated on the Blue Tribe. He was not seen as too much of a threat, despite being a winner. And yeah, I think he plays fine. He's just really passive, which is kind of the problem of a lot of these players. But yeah, not a crazy game. But I mean, he was aware that Max was playing really well, which is a good read, so makes sense why he went home here, but an okay game. So we now head into the final 7 round, which is probably the weakest part of Max's game, in my opinion. I didn't really realize this until reevaluating it, but he kind of makes some suboptimal plays. And this round's actually pretty interesting, but first of all, we don't know the challenge from this round. I hadn't written down all the challenges, and I just don't remember what this one was. But Ian ends up winning it, and yeah. So going into it, it's pretty clear at this point that Max and Ian are a pretty solid duo, probably closest allies in the game, so Max is obviously going to stay with Ian. The question really becomes whether or not he wants to keep Ted and Harry for another round, or if he wants to keep Ben and Jane in the game for longer. And I think the thing is, Max probably thought at this point that with Evan gone, Ben and Jane were both alone. Their closest allies were him, so he probably felt like he could manage them. But I kind of think that's a misread. After Evan was gone, it's pretty clear that Ben was targeting Max at this point. He knew Max was the core of the tribe. He had relationships with all of the people in the game, so... And Ben didn't have immunity this round, so he totally should have been getting rid of him. But for some reason, he didn't see him as a threat. Ian and Max start talking about it, and they ultimately decide they're going to target Ted and Harry at this point, break up that duo, and Ben will be less of a problem, and they can deal with him later. I do understand with this move. I mean, they don't want that duo to be in for too long, but really, they had the numbers anyway, with Jane and Caleb being more with them, and Ted and Harry just get really bitter after this move, so I don't know, I could take it or leave it. I mean, mostly I would say it's not the best choice here, but not terrible. But before the voting starts, Harry is the one who finds the newly hidden idol, and this is the final idol, and it's also the final idol that's not played well. So, going into Tribal, Harry made it known that he had the idol, and Max wants to eliminate it as a problem because he wants to obviously get rid of Ted. So he successfully convinces Harry to throw the idol on the roof at the tribal area, which is ridiculous and just shows that Harry had no idea what was going on. I don't know if Ted knew that they were flipping on him and not voting out Ben, but based on the results of the vote, it does seem like Harry and Ted were still under the impression that Jane and Ben were the ones on the bottom, not them. So when the votes come in, we see that Max, Ben, Ian, Caleb, and Jane all vote for Ted. They don't split the votes, which I think is weird. They should have put like one vote on Harry, or two. But Ted votes for Jane, and Harry votes for Ben, which I guess sort of means that they convinced them there was some sort of split vote going on. I don't know. So we lose Ted here, and Ted plays sort of well. I mean, I used to think this was a decent game. He was with Max and Ian for the entire game up till this point and just gets flipped on by them, so you gotta knock him a little bit for not being closer to Max and Ian than they are to each other. And, I mean, he was seen as a threat despite the fact that he wasn't really a threat, and, like, Ben was a way bigger threat. So, overall, the first half was good, just passive, and then he gets flipped on. Not a lot to talk about. Moving on to the final 6 round, which is probably one of the best rounds of the game. This round is crazy, and also another weak point for Max. There are no more idols in the game after this. I didn't re-hide one after Harry threw it on the roof. I was kind of out of idols, but yeah. The challenge here is a paper airplane building and throwing challenge, which is so dumb because they just game this immediately, and they just start throwing balls of paper, which go farther than the paper airplanes. Whatever. Caleb wins immunity here, which doesn't really matter. At this point, Harry is alone. He's not really a threat. Max is able to pull him in, and Max pretty much has Harry on his side at this point, which I would say is a pretty big knock against Ian's game, because the fact that Max is able to scoop up Harry and get him as a number for him when Max is the one running the whole game and a big threat is really bad. But it's at this point when Ben decides that it's time to strike. Max needs to go home because it's pretty clear that he has Jane. He's trying to pick up Harry, so Ben needs to strike now. And I'm actually pretty impressed by Ben here. Yes, he's not able to grab Harry, which is a pretty big knock, and he probably should have done something about Max in the last round, especially because he was safe. I mean, Max wasn't even targeting him last round. He should have told Ted and Harry and tried to do something. But yeah, Ben makes a pretty big pitch to Ian and Caleb that Max is going to betray them, and that Max has all these numbers behind him, and that Ian and Caleb are going to be screwed at the final 5, especially because why would Max want to bring his duo partner Ian to the end? And this play works really well, actually. Ben is able to get Ian and Caleb against Max, which is really bad for Max. However, because Max has Jane and Harry, like, on lock at this point, it's not looking super great for Ben and Ian. We get into the vote, and it ends up being 3-3, where Ben, Caleb, and Ian vote for Max. Max, Jane, and Harry vote for Ben. And Ian and Caleb just pretty immediately fold, which I guess is a bad move. I mean, they shouldn't have gone to Raw, because that would have been bad, but they probably should have at least tried to hold out and, like, see if Harry would fold. But Harry and Jane were pretty locked to Max at this point, and they're not super strategic players, so it makes sense that Ian would have been afraid of a rock draw here. But yeah, we get to the revote. Ian and Caleb ultimately back down from going after Max and let Ben go home. And let's talk about Ben, who plays relatively passively. He stays in Mackay's alliance for the first half, which is good. I mean, the fact that he was included in that alliance over some people is good. He wasn't a leader or anything, but good positioning-wise. At the merge, he's not a big threat in that group, and he's able to weasel his way into the Blue Tribe group, which is good. Makes a good relationship with Evan. Prevents Max from voting him out when he totally should have. He wins 2 immunity challenges, and I just think he makes the move a bit too late. He should have tried to get Max out at the final 7 when he could have grabbed Ted and Harry and potentially Ian, but he waits too long, and he's not able to pick up Harry. That's the biggest flaw. Had he been able to get rid of Max here, I don't think he wins the game. I think Ian probably wins the game at that point, because I'd imagine he would have tried to get rid of Ian next, which I don't think would have succeeded, as Jane and Harry definitely didn't trust him. So I think he would have gone home at some point, and either Ian or Jane would have ended up winning. But yeah, a pretty decent game, honestly. Like, one of the better ones on this season. We have now reached the final 5 round, and this round is kind of interesting. I mean, it was pretty clear what was going to happen. Max wins a knocking down blocks immunity challenge, so, I mean, Ian and Caleb can't even get rid of him if they want to. So they're forced to go for Harry in this round, which was never going to happen. Why would you vote out Harry? He kind of sucks. You have to bring him to the end, basically. So, I mean, the writing's on the wall for Ian, but I don't know if he actually saw it, because obviously Max, Harry, and Jane are going to vote him out. They're not going to vote Caleb out. He's not that good either. So Ian and Caleb go to Max. They try to convince him to vote for Harry, which is never going to happen. And yeah, Ian seems blindsided at this tribal. We end up getting a 2-3 vote, obviously. He really shouldn't have been blindsided, though. Like, it really wasn't going to work. He probably should have tried to get, like, Harry or Jane to vote out the other one, but that probably wouldn't have worked either. But yeah, Ian was pretty screwed here. He should have seen it coming. And let's talk about Ian, who probably plays the second best game of the season. I mean, he wasn't as well respected or flashy as Max, and he wasn't super great at, like, picking up random numbers like Max was. However, him and Max controlled the vast majority of this game, and Max never really flipped on him. I mean, Max didn't flip on him until Ian flipped on Max, so I'd give Ian a lot of credit for this season. He gets all the way to 5th place. If he had played a little bit safer, he could have probably gotten a little further. I don't think he beats Max at the end, or potentially even Jane. I mean, Jerry likes Jane, but a pretty good game. I'm pretty impressed by Ian on this season. We now get to the final normal round of the game, and this round kind of sucks, because Max should have had to deal with one last tribal council. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened. While it would have been upsetting had Max lost the game here and we would have gotten a Jane, Caleb, and Harry final 3, I do think it's kind of underwhelming that he just makes it to the end because of another circumstance that was out of his control. But yeah, that circumstance is during the immunity challenge, which is a running challenge that ends with having to make a basket. Caleb's going to win the challenge. He's way ahead of everyone else. He's already shooting. And Jane's in second. She trips, hits her head, has to be medically evacuated from the game. So yeah, she automatically gets 4th, and Caleb and Harry and Max automatically advance, which is underwhelming, because had there been a tribal here, Caleb would have gone home, but if Caleb had won immunity, I don't know what would have happened. I don't think Max would have gone home. I think probably Harry would have gone home, but the final 3 with Jane and Max in it would have been really interesting. So it's kind of underwhelming that we were robbed of that, but this round still is sort of interesting because we've never had a medical evacuation, so this round is pretty unique. But with that, let's talk about Jane, who gets 4th place for the second time, which will be a trend. And yeah, she shouldn't have gotten 4th place. She either would have won immunity here and gotten to the end, or had Caleb lost, he would have been voted out. Had he not lost, Harry would have been voted out. She should have gotten to the end, and if she gets to the end without Max, she for sure wins the game, potentially unanimously. And even if she gets to the end with Max, we get a really interesting tribal council. I know some people claim that she beats Max, and Max himself afterwards was a little surprised at how well liked Jane was with the jury. And I've ran through this before. I do think she still loses to Max, but the vote is really close, because she's definitely getting Chris and Teo, obviously. Probably Evan. Potentially Ted, because Ted was pretty bitter at Max. And that's already 4 votes. I do think Max would have gotten most of the other votes, but it's kind of unclear. I mean, he for sure gets Ben, Ian, and Mary, but I don't know who Declan would have voted for. And then the votes kind of hinging on the other person who would have gotten 4th, Caleb or Harry. And I do think both of them lean Max, but could have voted for Jane. So it would have been a really tight vote. Pretty interesting. But alas, she gets medically evacuated, gets 4th place. She's just destined to get 4th place. So yeah, with that, we get to Final Tribal Council. And with Jane not here, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen, and I'm pretty sure most people knew what was going to happen too. Max comes in with locked votes from Ian, Ben, Mary, and Jane. They weren't going to vote for anyone else. The other votes are a little bit more up for grabs, but Teo and Chris aren't really considering voting for Caleb, even though they weren't excited to vote for Max. Same with Declan. I mean, he could have voted for Harry, I guess, but, no, he was going to vote for Max. So then Ted and Evan become the only votes that are, toss-ups, probably not going to go to Max, but, I mean, obviously he doesn't need them. He already has 7 votes, so he's won the game. It's just whether or not he's going to win unanimously. And Ted does vote for Caleb, which is stupid, but whatever. He thought Caleb played better, and he was mad at Max. And then Evan votes for Harry because he knows Max is going to win, and he thinks it's funny to vote for Harry. So whatever. So let's talk about Harry, who gets second place in this season, but plays terribly. He's on the bottom of the original Red Tribe, not in the power structure, and is only kept in the game because he's just not a threat at all. At the Swap Tribe, him and Ted are a mess. They're not going to get voted out, but for some reason they misplay the idol. At the Merge, again, he's on the bottom, just following the Majority Alliance because they're never going to vote him out because he's not a threat. He's out of the loop on the Ted vote. He throws the idol on the roof, and then he just follows Max to the end of the game where he loses. Pretty underwhelming game. But yeah, with that, let's go into Caleb, who also gets second and also doesn't play very well. Probably a little bit better, but not much. Technically, he was in the Majority Alliance originally on the Red Tribe, just not doing a whole lot. And I mean, people are targeting him throughout the game. He's used as a backup vote during the Teo vote. Some people are throwing straight votes on him throughout the game. It's not a super great game. He's never active. He just follows Ian and Max for most of the game. And he's out of the loop on several votes. And like Harry, he had no chance of winning the game. He doesn't beat anyone. So, again, not a good game. But let's talk about Max, who plays an amazing game. Now, I do think, in retrospect, I've been a little bit too high on Max's game. I've said it's perfect. It's not perfect. It's really impressive. The way he was able to structure the tribe at the Merge is pretty hard to do. I do think his game has holes, though, and while this might be the most impressive winning game, I don't think it's the best because it does actually have those holes, and some other games don't. The final 7 and final 6 rounds being the biggest examples of that. He should have voted out Ben a round earlier, and then letting Ian flip on him, even though it doesn't work, is still not great. And technically he also misreads Jane's threat level with the jury, where he technically could have lost to her, and he was going to take her to the end, so that's bad. But everything else outside of that is really impressive and very hard to do. It's pretty impressive what Max was able to do on this season. I think overall as a player, he's slightly overrated, but still really good player. So that's that. We're at the end of the season. Max wins. Let's talk about my rankings, which we can just blow through the early part. Riley didn't get to play. He's at the bottom. Vinny, Dan, Jackson, in the same order. Then we had Ian. He was just on the bottom, wasn't able to do anything. O'Sheen was in on 2 votes and then just didn't try and got voted out. Sam, same thing. He was a little bit more in the majority and for 3 votes instead of 2, and then quits. Declan, same thing as O'Sheen, but a little bit better. I have Harry really low on the list because he played so bad, but he did make it all the way to the end and was in on some votes, so I can't put him at the very bottom. After that, I have most of the Red Tribe that made the Merge. Chris, Teo, Caleb, all of them played decent in the beginning, but kind of passive, and then just get flipped on. Ted is next, followed by Evan and Mary, who are all in the majority in the early part of the game, but they lose control later on, get flipped on by people in better positions like Max and Ian, and aren't able to successfully take control of the game at the end. I have Mackay really high because he dominated his original tribe, and he only gets voted out because he gets the worst possible swap for him. And then the final 4 people all played pretty good games. Ben, while he should have made the move on Max a little earlier, he was in the majority at first, and he was able to infiltrate the Blue Tribe Alliance, which was pretty good. He was good socially, decent physically. Same thing with Jane. She was really good socially despite not controlling many votes, and probably could have won the game if she got to the end. Pretty impressive. And then Ian and Max just controlled the game. Ian was more outplayed by Max at the end, so I put him second, obviously. Max's game is just crazy, so he's obviously the best player on this season. And there we go. That's Season 3. Going through this season, I kind of am realizing that this season is not necessarily, outright the best season. It was really fun at the time. It was a lot of fun because the players were being so stupid and silly, and there was good gameplay from Max. It was just a wild time. I think I was riding on a high from it because it was just so much better than the first 2 seasons. But I think looking back on it, it's not, necessarily outright the best season. Season 7's pretty good. Season 4 even is pretty good. So, yeah, I do have a lot of fondness for the season because it's really the first true season, and we see some great gameplay from Max, and it has a lot of fun moments. So, yeah, that's Season 3.